Greetings, you admirable, you damnable accursed. David Herle here with Canada's most outrageously attractive panel of pundits. Scott, Reid, Kory Teneycke, and Jordan Leichnitz are here. It's going to be fucking hot this week. It's like a heat wave.
It's already hot.
Yeah.
Do you notice that I'm sweaty? I was out clipping the hedge actually before we recorded this.
I just thought that was like your general state.
You look more greasy than sweaty.
That's right.
I already have a sunburn, so I'm done.
Yeah, you kind of match your blazer there, Kory.
I'm in sunburn season. I come in two colors: pasty Northern European white and East Coast lobster red. And there's no transition between the two. It's one or the other. You got to pick.
Woody Allen used to say, "I don't tan, I stroke."
Yeah, right.
Speaking of hot, by the way,
David, you can't quote
just
Woody? A life hack here, okay?
You can't quote Woody anymore. I know that,
Woody.
and
You're
I
not
did
allowed
it anyway.
To go Woody anymore. Okay?
I know that, but I did it anyway.
The heart wants what it wants. That is a contaminated saying. No Woody.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh my God, he was one of my heroes up until that. Anyway,
whole thing, really.
Speaking of heroes and hot, Saskatchewan Roughriders 2-0 start the season. Paikin, eat your heart out. You with your gloating social media posts.
In very important sports news, which I rarely bring to the table, my 6-year-old defended his gold medal at the Preston Street cycling race this weekend, crushed in the under 7 category. So really his life lesson from this is that you can just roll up to this event once a year, dominate, and then like do no more practice. So his experience of organized sport has been great.
You get him one of those like tight-fitting cyclist jerseys that says, "Not even Italian, fuckers. Take this, Preston Street."
Even better, this kid did it in like his tie-dye and streamers. Like he was just, very chill about the whole thing.
Scott, were you able to assemble all of your various children for Father's Day?
I did. They came over last night for dinner, and we, you know what we did? We watched the original 1968 version of Planet of the Apes, which, for the purposes of a 14-year-old, son number 3, moves a little slowly in comparison to action/sci-fi movies of the day now, but we enjoyed ourselves immensely.
Yeah. Kory,
Charles
good weekend?
Heston.
Yep.
Yeah. A nice dinner with the boys last night. I've been moving into our almost completely renovated kitchen. So I spent most of the weekend like unwrapping glasses and putting them in cupboards and like very fucking exciting things like that. But anyway, it's exciting in my household to have a kitchen again.
So that you can boil hot dogs.
I can boil hot dogs and make chili for those hot dogs.
No, he's got to practice his barista skills. In this economy, you got to have a fallback, right?
Yeah. What color's your parachute? Mine's latte brown.
All right, here's the rundown this week. The hot NSICOP summer continues. We'll talk about the latest developments there. Ding, ding. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have officially accepted the fight on the capital gains tax. So they clearly see a political opportunity. We'll break that down. And our cursed clipping is the garage is set on fire piece we had teed up for last week but didn't get to. Tondema Charles writing in the Star about elected officials dealing with rising physical intimidation and threats. And then, as always, Gordon Pinsent, harbinger of our Hey Yous. So, team, we're back at it. Same shit, different day. Foreign interference in the NSICOP report. Trudeau has read it and says he doesn't agree with all the conclusions. On what basis? Or what he disagrees with, we don't know. Elizabeth May read it and said nothing to see here. She's holding another news conference today to try to turn 15 minutes into 20. Jagmeet Singh read it, said it was alarming, and has hardened his position on hand-on. Poilievre won't read it, so does not know what it concludes about interference with the Conservative leadership race. To my eye, both Trudeau and Poilievre look like they have something to hide here, but there's more scrutiny on Trudeau. If he doesn't say more, people are going to conclude he's protecting Liberals. Jordan, right now, everybody looks bad. Even Singh, who has to answer questions about why he's supporting a government that has MPs working with foreign interests. How are we in this spot, and what should we do?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the quote from Succession, right? I love you, but you're not serious people, that really describes, I think, what's going on with a lot of our leadership. Although I would say, I don't think Singh is necessarily exactly in the same boat. It would be on the flip side of that coin, rather foolhardy to go into an immediate election over this if we don't have any sort of resolution on this question. So I think he's on pretty safe ground there. But there is a real lack of leadership from Trudeau and from Poilievre on this. And I'm not sure that I would agree that Trudeau's necessarily in a worse spot. I think he and Poilievre are both in bad spots differently. And it's interesting. So the remarkable, I think, that we've gotten to a point where Elizabeth May is sort of dictating a national security conversation in our country. Wow. So we should really all reflect on that, that we've allowed ourselves to get into that situation. But it is proof. So her comments, whatever she's going to be saying today, what she said in the past, Singh's comments after reading the report, I think it really shows that clearly you can read this report and actually talk about it in a fairly high level of detail publicly. They both have said quite a bit, I think, and I don't know about you guys, but far more than I would have actually expected in terms of content in the report and what drove their conclusions from it. So I think that is something that undermines Poilievre's argument that taking the security clearance and viewing these documents is going to be some sort of a handcuff. Clearly, it's not. Clearly, you can still get out and have some conversations about it. I think so. Trudeau did talk a little bit about what his concerns were, and he was referring back to some of the comments that Dominic LeBlanc made last week about the committee not sort of fully reflecting some of the outreach that was done to MPs about threats. And if that sounds confusing and like a non sequitur to you, it also sounds like one to me. So the messaging that he is using about why he's not speaking about this report or why he's not taking, as the Prime Minister, occupying any sort of space of leadership on it, I think is very flimsy. And I don't think that they are at all saved by this gambit of tossing it to the Hogue Commission. And I just want to spend a moment on how I think dumb that whole idea is. It is just about buying time. It is just going to punt this off to a body that was not designed to look at anything like this. That was not what was in mind. Like looking at individual accusations was not the purpose of the inquiry. It's also not going to come back with any information for months. So are we to understand that these charges will just hang out like this until we await? And then the icing on the stupidity cake on this one is that when the Hogue Commission looks at this stuff and comes back with conclusions, they're still not going to name any names. There's still not going to be any more information made public about who is implicated in this.
So here's the deal, Jordan. I mean, here's the fucking deal. Are you telling me, so the Prime Minister says, my judgment is different than the NSICOP judgment. Nobody's going to name any names. NSICOP's not going to name names, and I'm not going to name names because I don't think the names should be mentioned because it would taint their reputations unfairly. Does this mean that we could go into the next election with people running who've been identified by NSICOP as working with foreign powers, and those people could well be candidates in the next election and nobody would know?
Yeah, I think that's wholly unacceptable, but I do think it's a possible outcome based on the current situation. I think so far Singh has been out saying that there was no one identified. So I think we're talking mostly about the Liberals and Conservatives here, but it's unclear, right? We don't know what the parties are doing. We know that Trudeau has seen it. We don't know if there's been any action from the Liberals on this. This is all an open question. I continue to believe that at the end of the day, this is all going to have to come back to the parties where they are going to have to make some decisions, likely without due process, about nominations. And they would be better to do that, I think quickly and clearly, because the issue the concern that I have with this right now, other than us looking really like we don't take foreign interference seriously, this is an absolutely wild situation to be in, where you have the Prime Minister and the likely incoming Prime Minister, walking around with their hands over their eyes and ears on this topic. Is also that if you leave the situation as it is, this casts a pall not really over Parliament generally, but let's be really clear, over MPs that have connections with other countries. That's who is now being looked at askance. And I think that's really unfair. It's really dangerous. It's quite corrosive to our democracy to leave it like that. And I think that for those who have a lot of concerns about questions of fairness and due process, that should also be unacceptable. So I would say overall, not very impressed and not very optimistic that that leaders are going to find their way out of the paper bag that is this particular fight in the next week.
Scott, I'm going to go to you next because I have a strong suspicion Kory's advice here is going to be to start throwing MPs out of windows from tall buildings. But
could hang them from cranes as well. So, there's lots of options.
Scott, what's motivating the Prime Minister here, and what are the consequences of what he's doing?
I think there's more than one thing. I think maybe they're the same thing. I think what's motivating him is I think there is a sincere concern that if you reveal the names and the basis of the evidence, then you have a problem in terms of the integrity of the information, your Five Eyes partners, all those kinds of things. I think it's easy for us to gloss over that. It's hard when you're in government to ignore it. And so I think that's a factor. Second, I think there is, I think it seems to me almost indisputable, based on what they've said and what they've not said, is that there's someone, at least one someone in their caucus that is the subject of allegations. I assume currently in their caucus that is the subject of allegations, and the government doesn't agree and doesn't want to get into a perverse argument about why it disagrees with that information, which takes me to my first point, because they can't reveal the basis of the allegation, therefore can't defend the individual, and are simply left with the allegation and what will appear to be political obstinacy. They don't want to let go of one of their own or somebody. So, I think they're hoping that there's a process fix to this. And while it seems like it's problematic and ugly, and while we might howl and say there's a fundamental principle here that seems horrifying, they don't. Meanwhile, Poilievre has, I think, almost an exactly same set of circumstances facing him. And he doesn't even want to get to the point where he's forced to go to a microphone and say, I can't get into the details, but I don't agree with the conclusions, which is almost certainly where he would end up unless he thinks there's somebody in his caucus that he would throw over. And so you end up so he sort of thinks that by turning his back on a burning house, he can later defend himself for not fetching a pail of water. And I think, to be honest,
if Trudeau went for transparency on Liberals that are named in the report, wouldn't the scrutiny shift brutally to Poilievre?
Yeah, but they don't want to do that, David, because he doesn't want to either condemn somebody on the basis of allegations that he doesn't believe but cannot reveal so that he can then defend them, or hang on to that person on the basis of allegations that he can't confront. And so you're going through this sort of bullshit theater thing. And I don't agree with that decision. I think that it's very problematic, but I think that's why they're where they are, both of them. And here's my big question. Will it matter? And I think it's an unacceptable situation. And I think there's a fetching chance that the intelligence that's been gathered and that the allegations might be more highly subject to interpretation than we think and give it credit for in the current environment. But you just can't have the stain of traitors, and that's the word that Singh used this week, hanging over Parliament. It's got to be resolved.
So what if it turns up in a negative
leadership
ad in the election campaign? You say it doesn't matter. What if it turns up in an NDP ad?
Well, we'll see. I mean, maybe it will matter. But one of the things, I look at it now and I say, I don't think that there's a conjoined self-interest between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So they want to try to get a punch in on each other. You're hearing more and more Liberals say, why won't Poilievre get sworn in? And you hear the Conservatives sniping all the time about traitors in the midst and all this kind of stuff. But neither one of them really want to take the next step. And so that's one factor. The next factor is I haven't seen any polling data that shows that this penetrates with people. Go to a bar or a coffee shop. People shake their head at this stuff. Most of it rolls against the government and just builds a case for change. But I don't know that people are actually saying this is what my vote's going to be driven by. And I know that's a highly cynical, horrible way of looking at it. And I think this is an issue of principle that surely ought to drive our leaders independent of partisan calculation. But I don't know, unless there's a leak that says David Herle collaborated with the Chinese, and then they're forced into battle stations in a fire drill. I don't know that Summer won't.
Fuck, I better delete my WeChat app.
Yeah. But don't you know, like I look at it and I go, they're gonna kick it before the 28th of June to the Hogue Commission, and they're gonna tread water on this and other stuff and try to make some news on other stuff. And then it's summer. So barring a Bob Fife, Steve Chase fastball, what happens next?
Kory, you tell us. What do you think about all this?
Where to start? I largely agree with Scott that I don't think this is a burning issue from a political standpoint with the electorate. I think it's not really a factor. Insofar as it is, I don't even think it's about this issue. I think it's about leadership and leadership brand. I think Poilievre's made a mistake in terms of not getting sworn in and taking a look at this. I think that would drive a great contrast against Trudeau. And I think the contrast is on leadership. But like the see no evil, hear no evil line has been Trudeau's line. And insofar as it's hurt anybody, this entire foreign influence narrative that's been going on for 18 months now, it's largely hurt Trudeau, and it's largely hurt Trudeau because he sees no evil, hears no evil until Bob Fife puts the details on the front of the Globe and Mail, and then they're forced to deal with it. So, like, where is there no credibility with the Prime Minister? It's Han Dong. Like, they were more than happy to keep him around through all of this. The only thing everyone agrees on, seemingly, is that Han Dong should be out. And his public testimony, I'll come back to, everyone can go and watch it and make their own determination. My determination is the guy's a fucking liar and a big problem. And the determination that even the hopelessly naive Elizabeth May seemed to come to was there's no place for this guy. Apparently she sees a place for him in the House of Commons, but him not being Liberal caucus is good enough. I think that a lot of credibility was burned by the Prime Minister in terms of that, and I suspect that some of the other examples in there are going to be Han Dong-ish, and I would also suspect that maybe some of it touches on the Conservatives. It certainly touched on the provincial Conservatives in Ontario. Their response was to toss their Han Dong version out of caucus. And you've seen the political issue go away for them as a result. Like that's the correct path to go take a look, exercise leadership. The provincial government, Doug Ford didn't have to come out and reveal intelligence sources and tell everyone, why he came to that determination to remove somebody from caucus, but remove he did. And the issue went away. And I think that's the proper approach. We're not going to tell you all of the details. We can't get into all the methods. But I've come to the following conclusion. This person has exercised poor judgment to the point where they can't sit in my caucus, and do that before the Bob Fife story, not after, and have it move on. But I don't think it's a good look for Poilievre on the leadership front in terms of not getting read in, outsourcing that to somebody else. Do we really want to outsource the vetting of who should be in caucus or not to some arm's length commission or body? I don't think so. I don't think that serves anyone's interests in the long term. But all of that to say, it's a gigantic distraction. If I were Poilievre, I would also be getting read in and getting this behind me so I could get back to talking about the economy and carbon tax and like all those other things that have been driving him up in the polls. This is eating up airtime and political column inches of coverage that are better focused elsewhere, if you ask me.
And I also think, sorry.
This is a committee of MPs. Let me just say, this is a committee of MPs of all the different parties. This is, as I understand it, a unanimous report. Okay? So a prime minister with enormous credibility in their honeymoon period would have a difficult time sustaining I use my judgment over the judgment of all of those people in this circumstance. How is it sustainable?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And I think we're witnessing that. They haven't been able to bleed off the pressure with what they've attempted. And I just wanted to say, like, I think that what we haven't talked about yet is nominations and the potential role of nominations in foreign interference. And I think all parties are united in not wanting Elections Canada to get involved in regulating nominations. Everybody's got an interest there. But the longer that this goes on, the greater
that position
that's
is.
right. The greater the likelihood is that that's where we're going to end up. So ironically, the thing that I think particularly Poilievre and Trudeau are really don't want to get into is becoming more likely because they're not confronting this in a straightforward way. Sorry, that's just what I wanted to add into that.
Well, let's talk about leadership races, because I think that's where it's far more poignant. I encourage people to read Justin Ling's piece from the last 3-4 days ago in the Star, where it sort of lifts the veil on at least one theory of the accusations around the Conservative leadership race, which is that the government of India wanted Patrick Brown's candidacy to be nixed because he was too close to Khalistani forces within the Sikh community.
I thought he'd always been reputed to be close to Modi, Kory.
Yeah, well, that's, I think both things are true. There's the massive Sikh population in Brampton, which Patrick Brown's very close to, and he's also very close to Modi. So I don't know, who knows? But that's what's alleged in that story. We don't know whether that's true or not, but it sheds some light on it. But imagine if you were running a Liberal leadership race, and their rules around who votes in a leadership are very difficult to defend in the context of foreign interference issues. Like the fact that you don't have to be a citizen or a permanent resident to be able to vote in these things is
you just have to want to vote it. You just have to want to vote, Kory. You just have to want to vote.
It's very literally it. Very problematic.
You don't even need to know really why you're voting. Just
but think of how intensely problematic that would be in the context of all of this information, those voting rules. And those forces conspiring to try to influence the outcome. And this would be, if Trudeau steps down, this would be a leadership race to pick the Prime Minister of Canada, in which the general electorate does not have a say. And yet you're going to have this indefensible, murky voting system that is almost like designed in a lab to maximize foreign interference opportunities. I just don't see how that can be left unchecked and uncommented upon, and frankly commenting upon it and shining a giant fucking spotlight on it, I think is politically to the benefit of the Conservatives and to anyone else who's running against the Liberals. So maybe not the NDP, they're in bed with the Liberals, but for everyone else, it's, I think there's a benefit to doing that. And there's a benefit to cleaning up politics. Will it matter? Probably not. Eventually the media will lose interest. Eventually people will move on. There's very little interest from the general public today. I think there'll be more in the context of leadership race, but that's a tomorrow problem, I guess.
Here's the thought
Scott,
exercise.
the latest poll says the Liberals are at 22 and the NDP are at 19.
Yeah.
So that's why I do worry about an NDP move on this issue, an NDP ad on this issue or something, because progressives have a hard time tolerating moral inadequacies in the people they vote for. And if the NDP get a moral leg up on us and it's really this tight, I don't like it.
I think that's a concern. I think that Kory's point is really, really critical. So I'm just echoing, that's a concern that you have, David, in terms of where it leaves the party in the polls, because they're tied now, if that number is correct. That is a margin of error number. That means they're tied. That's an uncomfortable spot. In case people don't know exactly how to interpret it, that's an uncomfortable spot for the government of Canada, the Liberal Party of Canada to be. That's not an acceptable number. I always go back to this. I've said it 100 times. I just remember back in our day when you said, when we drop below 30 points in overnight tracking, you're like, the Liberal Party cannot be below 30 points. Like that was an ironclad fucking...
You can't hold the center if you're below 30 points. You can't.
Bulletproof vest rule that we had, and now look where we are. But then I think Kory's point and Jordan's point are all incredibly. Like, think about how it's going to play out in the leadership race. None of the candidates would be able, if there's a Liberal leadership race, none of the candidates would be able to say, you know what, I'm setting a higher standard, because that just means I'm going to lose. So they're not going to be able to unilaterally declare, we're going to reject, we'll only sign up people who are 18, we'll only sign up people who are citizens. Like, you won't be able to do that. You're going to have this clusterfuck. Take a look at the example that Jordan says, another consequence. Yes, the parties are going to lose control. There's going to be a demand eventually to be in someone's brand interest to advocate for elections candidate to take over these things. So you have all these things rippling out. So you go back to the thought exercise I have is going and working back with what you were saying, David, which is why? Why? Like, if you're the prime minister and you know that if you were in the most powerful position possible against what is perceived to be the assembled view of security intelligence services in Canada, and then with the imprimatur and concurrence of an all-party committee, presumably many of whom would have all sorts of theoretical partisan reasons to dissent, but they all agree that what they see is distressing. And then Jagmeet Singh, who, you can say, well, he doesn't have any dirty laundry according to the report, so it's easy for him to demand that everybody throw open the doors to the dry cleaners, but still, right, he's also concluded this. So why? Wouldn't the easiest thing in the world be, if you're the prime minister, to say, you know what, there's 3 people that they've raised questions about. One of them's no longer around. That person will never be allowed to run from us again. And these other 2 are going to have to sit out. It can only presumably be that it's someone who they really feel they don't want to do that to, which seems like a fucked up way to go about it when we rhyme off all the things that we just rhymed off about the potential consequences, maybe certain consequences of this.
They're protecting someone.
Or it's because they genuinely feel, which I'm sympathetic to, whether it's someone they really care about or not, that this does turn into a railroading because the evidence can't be shared, and therefore people don't have access to natural justice to defend themselves. And so, I think that's where we're at. And
if Trudeau was just substituting his own judgment for David McGuinty's, I would have some sympathy for that position. Yeah. But it's the all-party, unanimity.
And I think the other problem is that, he hasn't been visibly concerned about the topic of foreign interference now for over a year. And so this is not being read in isolation. It's being read in the context of this prime minister seeming to not view this as an urgent issue with all these allegations, right? So it's not just being read on the merits of this one report and this is a real issue for them.
Can I just say, let's think about, so what would you do? What if we were there? And I know Kory's answer, but what would we do to try to carve our way, to carve a door out of this room and get out of it? And so I asked him, it was just a thought exercise. Could the prime minister, as an example, come forward and say, I am limited in what I can say, but what I can tell you is that the nature of the allegations are that a member of my caucus received support in a nomination process of this general kind, some services and some money that the Chinese government wanted this person to be nominated, and that person is therefore coming. Couldn't he go through and say, this is the nature of the allegation. I'm going to characterize it to the degree to which I can, and then I'm going to tell you, without naming the person, that I reject that I don't think that that's a fair reading. Can he go further? Does that help or does it hurt?
Yeah, well, look, there's so much speculation on what's in this, but I think more transparency opens up, a more enlightened debate around it.
Let me ask you a hard political question, Kory. Let me ask you a hard political question about this, which is, what if it was somebody that was either a really close friend of the leaders or somebody that was really important to the government? In all honesty, right. Scott, you asked, what would we do? I could see that situation flummoxing us a bit.
Yeah, it'll flummox, sure. But ultimately,
and the same could be happening for all we know.
Okay, but it's all going to come out anyway. Ottawa, it is the smallest, shittiest little village in the country in so many ways, including when it comes to keeping secrets. And this is something that will not stay a secret because too many people have read the report. Too many people know what it is. Too many people, blab to people in the media or blab to somebody who blabs to people in the media. And at some point, the Bob Fifes of the world will put all of these accusations in print. And then it will be the same as hand-on. People will look at it and it'll either be defensible or not. And I just think there is a more rational and better way to make decisions in Ottawa than leak to the press to get an outcome. And,
is there a mechanism
that seems to be the mechanism that seems to be the mechanism that we use and that people are most comfortable using. So that's the one it's going to be. But, so I guess we'll see. But like, there are some obvious things. If the government wanted to improve things, or if the opposition wanted to improve things, where they could take steps in the right direction. You could clean up our own nomination processes. We could change the rules around that. We could stop letting MPs take junkets paid for by foreign countries or lobbying organizations. Like, you're not allowed to take free tickets to a hockey game. But somehow it's okay to take a $15,000 trip from the state of Qatar. Or, I saw Garnet Genuis to out one of the Conservatives talking about how he, has taken a bunch of these trips from paid for by foreign governments, but apparently it's okay because there are people that we have common ties ideologically with, and one of them turns out to be the Palestinian Authority. So defend that. I just think the whole thing is icky and gross. You shouldn't be entitled to a junket to Taiwan because you're an MP, but a lot of people apparently feel that they are. Is that appropriate? I would say no in the context of all this stuff. No.
But that doesn't help you deal with this specific problem.
It does. I think it's all in there. I think it's all in there, and you can, take steps that move things in the right direction and demonstrate leadership, or you can just wait for Bob Fife to print the story, and then we'll hang from, the bridge, whoever's named in it, which is the approach we're using now.
Let me just, again, pursuing another thought exercise. What if your posture in the Prime Minister's office was the opposite? What if the only consideration was that you were handcuffed in terms of your ability to share the information? What if you really wanted to either clear someone's name or to say, I'm acting on it, and here's why? Wouldn't you be able to find, is there not, are we accepting just as a matter of convention and premise that they can't share this information?
No.
Are we certain there's no way they couldn't share the information?
But I think actually,
if Fife writes a story, won't they find a fucking way to share the information?
Yeah. And look, I think, again, we have to look at the recent examples. If you look at the degree of detail that May and Singh were able to go into, it's clear that they are able to discuss much larger amounts of information than what we're getting from the Prime Minister and Poilievre. So I actually think that, to David's point, there is a way to characterize what's happening in that report without violating the rules. That's what you're seeing May and Singh doing. And nobody has hauled them off in handcuffs yet. So presumably that's all within bounds. So I do think that there's actually a fair bit of latitude there to do that kind of thing if they wanted to. But I think it's the will there that's lacking at this point, not the opportunity to go out in a level of detail that would be useful.
Right. That sounds like the last word. Let's talk about the power of consistency, the unyielding power of consistency. The world turns. Canada will go at least 32 years without a Stanley Cup. Sorry, Edmonton. And continuous investments in new technology can march us forward toward better lives. That last one is the aim of our presenting sponsor TELUS's newly branded Global Ventures arm. It is Canada's most active corporate venture capital fund. Since inception, it's invested in over 150 companies poised for significant growth and market transformation across 10 countries, working on solving some of the world's biggest challenges in agriculture, health, digital customer experience, and the Internet of Things. In 2023 alone, TELUS Global Ventures put over $200 million into 30 new ventures. Enough with the numbers. Let me just inject some granularity into this, a smattering of the good businesses we're talking about. Talk Life, an innovative global online peer support community for people to talk about their mental health and then get the services they need. Waymap, this is an accessibility-first, super accurate navigation app that works outdoors, indoors, and here's the kicker, even deep underground. And Code Labs, a company at the forefront of the smart building landscape. So back to our theme, the power of consistency. These are the kinds of investments that TELUS wants to keep on keeping on with, as Jerry Jeff would say. But as I've said and said and said here again, regulatory conditions, like what the government is considering right now on a new wholesale regime, play a major part in what they can do. TELUS believes the best way forward is a tailored approach that recognizes regional differences, as well as the companies who consistently invest in their services and how they can make Canada and the world a better place to live. Let's get to our clip. No, it's a tough spot for sure. Tondam and Charles, a couple of weeks ago in the Toronto Star, wrote an interesting piece, and here's an excerpt from it. Pretty jarring opening. It seems only a matter of time before an elected official in Canada gets seriously hurt. In March, someone set fire to the garage at Liberal MP Brendan Hanley's Yukon home. No one was injured in the blaze that destroyed the garage, 2 cars and a motorbike, but it left him shocked, profoundly shaken, and fearful about the safety of his family and neighbors. Vince Badawi, a Liberal MP, doesn't want to talk about the guy who came to his Port Colborne home last year, smashed the front window with a baseball bat, threatened his neighbors, and chased kids down the street. Melissa Landsman, the Conservative MP for Thornhill and Deputy Leader, doesn't want to talk about the 2 individuals, one a woman, who've been charged with threatening her to the point that she required close police protection. Eric Duncan, a Conservative MP for an Ontario riding near the U.S. border, doesn't want to talk about the man recently released from police custody who is charged with uttering threats against him 4 months after the same man was also charged with threatening Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In the past several weeks, protesters have turned up at the homes of Justice Minister Arif Virani and Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly. I'm very concerned, to be frank, said RCMP Deputy Commissioner Mark Flynn. We've seen a shift from people protesting or appearing at Parliament Hill, Minister's office, constituency offices, etc., to where we are now seeing people go to their residences and start taking actions at their residence. Flynn says there's a lot more of it and traces the shift as having happened over the last couple of years, a period that includes the COVID pandemic, the anti-vaccine and anti-establishment movements that gave rise to the convoy protests, as well as Russia's war in Ukraine. Societal tensions have only escalated since war broke out in the Middle East. Last week, Sergeant-at-Arms Pat MacDonald told a Commons committee the rise in harassment of MPs, including indirect threat behavior, rose from 8 cases in 2019 to 530 in 2023. So, Kory, you have the most current hands-on work with elected representatives and recruiting candidates. What are you hearing about this?
That's a real problem. and it's much worse than it's ever been, at least in living memory. I don't know, maybe we could go back to the Fenian raids or something, and John A. having to, grab a musket to, defend himself. But like in the modern context, like this is unprecedented. It really kicked into high gear over the pandemic, but I don't think it's just because of that. I think all the other reasons mentioned, we've got a couple of wars going on. We've got a political and media environment that is much more polarized than we've seen in the past, and it creates these pockets of radicalization, and people are pushing the limits of what is acceptable in terms of political protest and political expression. That increasingly includes uttering threats and quite publicly speculating on various forms of violence that should be done to elected officials or people involved in the media. So, like I think it's bad. I think we've all had threats, and like we're nobodies. But like it extends far beyond just elected officials. I think it's infecting anyone who's anywhere near public policy, and it's a problem. So what do you do? Like to change some laws? I don't think that's necessary. I think there's lots of things under law right now when it comes to uttering threats. What's been lacking is the police's willingness to actually arrest people and prosecutors to charge people when they do these things. And I think that needs to happen. It might be an extension of police protection to a much wider swath of people in elected office than has previously been contemplated in Canada. But I think there's a case for it. We saw pretty disturbing protests outside like the home of the health minister in Ontario during the pandemic, and like ugly stuff. And people feeling very self-righteous and virtuous in doing it. We've seen, kids being threatened going into Jewish schools in Toronto. We've seen like some of the most, we had somebody shooting at a school the other day. Like, this stuff is off the charts, and it's a real problem. I'm not sure what we do about it. There isn't a demand side fix on this. I think it's just out there, and we've got to figure out what we do. More arrests, more police protection, probably.
Jordan, in the 2004 election campaign, Rick Mahoney and I were walking through the market toward my apartment, and a group of guys were ominously walking behind us, muttering darkly about Liberals and stuff. And as we turned into my apartment, the one guy yelled out, "No, I wanted to fight Mahoney and that other fat cocksucker."
And you immediately rolled back down. Yeah, no?
You're like, there's no third person here.
Anyway, this sounds more serious.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think is driving it? Like, what makes people suddenly think that it's... If you never thought that through decades and decades, people never went to ministers' houses to light their garage on fire. Why the fuck would people be doing that now?
So, I think Kory's touched on some of the reasons. And, and I think a lot about, Charlie Angus actually talked about this. I think he wrote a really good piece a few weeks ago talking about his reasons for not standing again. And he summed it up as like COVID and the pandemic, like it broke people's brains in some way. Like it was an inflection point, I think, where people, a couple things happened. So people spend more and more time online, which has, the effect of pulling people into spheres of disinformation and into spaces where there's just less distinction between what's real and what's not. And frankly, less moderation of comments. There was a time where if an MP was being threatened on Twitter, you could call somebody at Twitter and they would deal with it. That doesn't happen anymore. Like, those things are just allowed in the name of, whatever Elon Musk decides is that day's version of free speech, as long as it doesn't impugn him, to kind of carry on. And so they have spaces, like that discourse has spaces to grow. I think also there's an increasing sort of dehumanization of politicians. This idea that politicians are not people, that they're legitimate targets anywhere they are, in Parliament or at home, that is contributing to sort of permission structures in people's brains, that it makes it okay to protest people's homes or okay to dox people's children, which has happened. All of these things, I think, are really dangerous. I think the impacts actually go beyond just personal safety concerns for politicians, which sometimes I think maybe get waved away, but they shouldn't, because it changes the public's access to MPs. Like, I know a lot of elected people who used to do the thing where you would go to Tim Hortons, you would say, "I'm going to be here from 3 until 5, like, come talk to me. I'd love to hear from you." But they don't do that anymore because it's simply not safe for them to announce that they're just going to be sitting somewhere in public, ready to talk to people. It changes who runs. It means that women are less likely to want to run because they're worried about their safety. They're worried about their kids.
It's less rational to run than it's ever been.
That's
Jordan,
right. It's not fun, right? It's not fun. And increasingly, it doesn't feel safe. And it also changes how long people stay, right? And I think about, we talked about, obviously what's happening in Alberta there and that, Shannon Phillips. That's an example, right? And I think that these things it's objectively bad for our democracy. It creates an environment that can actually lead to physical attacks. And so I spend a lot of time looking at what's happening in Europe. And so they just had their European elections there. And physical attacks on politicians have skyrocketed. They've more than doubled in the last few years. You had gangs of people attacking MPs as they were hanging signs. Somebody was hit over the head with a bag of bricks at a public meeting. So the distance, I think, between these threats, we sometimes have the sense in Canada that sort of thing can't happen here. And believe me, if there's any place where they really take that seriously and don't want it to happen again, it's Germany. And that's where this stuff is happening now, right? So I don't think we're at all immune to that trend. And I worry a lot that there's a dismissiveness about these threats to politicians, that it's just complaining, or it's just whining, or it's not real, but I think it's very real. And I worry that we're on the milder end still of what this can escalate to. And I don't know what the solution is. I think part of it, some of the things Kory's talked about in terms of more appetite for prosecution, better access to public protection. But a lot of this is also just about the civic culture that we want to
totally. What's happened to our norms?
Yeah. What do we think is okay here? And I think that's a much harder nut to crack, because it's true that COVID and the disinformation, all of that stuff has created just a really different public space that we have less and less control over.
Yeah. The Overton window has moved a long ways, and it doesn't shift back easily.
Yeah.
Scott, what do you think?
Well, I might piss people off because I think we fuck around on this issue. I think people are scared. I think that people take harbor in a common analysis and bleeding about things that are wrong, and they shy away from talking about how it might get fixed and what that would mean. And so I think there's very little political consensus to move forward. Here's my take. I think that it's all a bunch of the soup of the stuff that we've all talked about, millions of people have written about who were smart, pandemic and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, it particularly begins with social media, where people can find community. They can engage in rhetoric that's increasingly weaponized, often militaristic, very violent. Used to be that you should be ashamed to use the C word in a public forum, talking about a woman. Now, suddenly that just seems like it's okay. So you get that. And within that sense of community, then the question is, okay, so there's always been mobs. Well, now the mobs can organize and they can reinforce one another much more easily because of social media. And then they can activate on that and all that kind of stuff. But there's always been mobs. The question is, who stands at the front of the mob on the steps of the library and says, no, right? No, I'm taking it down. And so I think the big problem now is not just the mob, social media, all this stuff where we find this, but the political reaction to it by political leaders. And I think increasingly, because people see there's a sense of community there, there's a source of activism, there's a source of fundraising, there's a source of heavy engagement, and engagement is so critical in our political system in electoral terms that what you find is that political leaders feed back that rhetoric, not the 10. They don't dial it. They don't take the harshest edge of it, but they give them back a 7. And because their norms have shifted, and because their standards have slipped, and because when standards slip, they tend to only downshift. They don't go back up. So to use the American example, obviously, I mean, we can talk about Trump all we want, but even Marjorie Taylor Greene heckles the president in the State of the Union. And that's kind of cheered and laughed at, whatever, no big deal. It's, and so it's not a 10, it's a 7. But the challenge with that is the message that people hear is either you're right, I agree with you, or even if I won't say you're right, you're justified. And if you're justified, well, then you're justified to go to someone's office or go to someone's home, or if you're fucked in the head, maybe take on a violent act. And so what's it going to take? It would take political consensus. The laws and structures and standards that we have to protect and guard people are clearly inadequate. The laws and structures and norms that we used to have that would curtail and curb this discussion, whether it's because of changing culture or changing technology or the interaction of both, those standards and norms are not adequate. If they were adequate, we wouldn't have this discussion. We wouldn't be having it constantly. We wouldn't have increasing threats and dislocation and people not wanting to participate in the process. So what do the parties do? The parties have to get together and say, here's what the fucking standard is, right? It isn't just going to be that you can't violently attack someone or violently communicate with them. It's got to be they have to say, here's a consensus standard. There's a code of conduct in terms of how we will talk about one another and how we will, and apply it to everybody. And my view is political leaders won't agree with it. And political leaders on the right in particular won't agree with it because it's too alienating.
Can I touch on that a bit? Because I think in part because of Trump, the right gets blasted with more of this. But But can I point out that the what is her name, Kathy Griffith, the comedian who gets depicted with having decapitated the president, like this. There is a lot of stuff on all sides. And you can point to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but AOC isn't a hell of a lot better, to be honest. Like, there are a lot of performance artists in politics masquerading as politicians who have been amping up rhetoric on all sides. Like, I think every party has some blame here. Every ideological group has some blame here. And, because culture is a shared thing. And for whatever reason, it's been declining and being weaponized in a way that's coming home to roost. I think there is an argument to be made for political leaders to step into the breach here and make the case about toning down the rhetoric on the other side. Like, I think it would be good to have Poilievre make a statement about fuck Trudeau is not acceptable. In the same way, it would have been really useful for Trudeau to have said fuck Harper is not acceptable when that was being done in 2015. But I'm not holding my breath on one side or the other that's going to happen.
Last word, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with Scott on this. I think leadership and what political leaders do and the tone and tenor that they set is significant here. But it's hard for anyone to break away from that, right? As long as people perceive that there's a political advantage in amping up polarization, then there'll always be somebody who will go to that well. And I would like to hope that there's a chance for the angels of our better nature to come together and make such an agreement. Maybe we'll get there. It would be to everybody's benefit, I think, if we did, but I'm not super optimistic.
Okay, so we are about to pass through the leafy veil into summer. July is the best month, and it's 2 weeks away. So in the spirit of lazy summer reflection, beloved Hurly-Burlyites, we have a little quiz for you, courtesy of our sponsor, CN. Here we go. In the 20s, yes, 100 years ago, CN started up a coast-to-coast radio network. What sports show did it establish, and what did that radio network eventually become? If you said the world of lacrosse, well, you were wrong. If you said Hockey Night in Canada, though, you win a small, inexpensive doll. And if you guessed that the radio network eventually became the CBC, you get to sing Bob Cajun at your next block karaoke party. Yes, the CBC sprang from the forehead of CN. Next question. In 1937, nearly 100 years ago, CN founded an airline using $5 million in federal seed money. It bought 2 Lockheed Model 10 Electras and 1 Boeing Stearman biplane. Economy class was more comfortable back then, by the way. So, what was the airline's name, and what was it eventually renamed? Take your time. If you didn't say TransCanada Airlines and eventually Air Canada, you've never paid for a pillow or shrunk into a middle seat. Yes, CN birthed Air Canada. Next question, moving forward a bit. On November 17th, 1995, the most successful initial public offering in the history of Canadian equity markets began. The Canadian government, and by extension Canadian taxpayers, received $2.2 billion. What was the name of the company stock offered that day? If you didn't surmise CNR, well, you're missing the theme of this spot. Said theme being, CN is foundational. It's been around a long, long time. And it helped build Canada. And we appreciate it. More fun facts next week. Same Herle time, same Herle channel. Didn't another heroic show once use that line? Okay, let's spend a couple of minutes on our last topic. The capital gains tax gambit is back. Poilievre bit, so we'll see how good the trap was. I'm sure Brooke Pigott has been focus grouping responses to death since the budget occurred, so the Conservatives likely feel they can win this fight. And it's not clear that Trudeau can win any fight right now, even if people would agree with him if him wasn't him. So Scott, Liberals got what they wanted. How's it going to go?
I'm not convinced it's going to work. for a bunch of reasons. I think that the fact that they got the fight they wanted is evidence that maybe they weren't as successful in setting the trap as they thought or hoped. And I think at the beginning of this discussion, we all voiced, or not, at least some of us voiced, I think, maybe all of us, I can't recall precisely, the question as to whether or not the capital gains as a tax, as a wedge, using as a tax lever to force a wedge, whether it was sufficient. And my fear is that it is understood by only those who feel threatened by the increase. And add to that, the kind of the chum that you get in terms of, well, doctors and
which is a lot more people than may actually be affected. People who fear that they're going to
no question, right? And so I don't know that it's been set in the sharpest terms. I think that if you really wanted to have run this fight, you probably wanted to increase the upper tax bracket or corporate tax, but you're in government. So there's 100 reasons when you sit around a table while you walk yourself out of that and say, that's going to have a bunch of deleterious effects economically and otherwise. We don't want to do it. And maybe those are sound considerations, but you're left with convincing yourself that this measure will be able to provide you with the political fix you want. We'll see. They're going to fight it out. Even if they can make the rich poor argument and make
the rich poor. Did you mean that, or did you mean make the rich pay?
What did I say?
Make the rich poor.
Yeah, make the rich poor. Let's make the rich poor. It's trading places. You're Dan Aykroyd. You dress as Dirty Santa and put a stick of bread down your pants. But
a salmon.
A salmon. I just don't think, how do they get their side of the message out? Right? Where are they going to persuade the public about this? And so it feels to me like it just fizzles. And I think that Poilievre has been smart in characterizing it as just a tax hike. So he's characterized it as not even an upper income tax hike, as kind of a middle class tax hike. And I go back to it. I sound like a broken record. In the absence of advertising, all you've got are ministers doing piss poor versions of videos. It's too cerebral in appeal. It's too limited in terms of its reach to have impact. And then if you want to crank it up and make it more emotional, you get the specter of Freeland saying, "We will bathe in the blood of our rich neighbors if action isn't taken, because this is the stakes." And so the rhetoric is so absurd and cartoonish that it then gets dismissed. And we can't seem to, there's no, it's one or the other, right? It's either this measure doesn't matter very much and you're being hyperventilating, or the failure to support this measure will surely result in a Robespierre-like revolution where we'll dine on the brains and blood of the rich.
Yeah, I don't know how we got from, I just think everyone should be able to afford prescription drugs to the revolution will not spare you, but somehow we did.
Kory, Poilievre's trying to turn the populist thing right back at Trudeau on this tax, though, by saying, and I presume, this is one of the things I presume has been researched and works, by saying Trudeau gave all the rich people in the country who are his friends, not mine, gave all the rich people in the country 6 weeks to organize their affairs to avoid this tax. So they're not going to pay this tax. But when you inherit your cottage 5 years from now, you're going to be fucked.
Yeah, I think they've done some very careful research and framing on this. There's a theory as to how the government could have used this to make it a political wedge, but it's predicated on a few things to have that work. One is to actually spend some money actually marketing the thing, and just like this and everything else, and we don't need to get into it again because we sound like a bunch of broken records here. They just, for whatever reason, don't do that, don't believe in doing that. So there's a big problem with having this work as a result of that. Two, I don't think Trudeau could, it's a nice sunny day here in Toronto. If Trudeau came out and said it's sunny in Toronto today, 70% of the electorate would say he's a fucking liar and go and look out the window to see whether that was true or not. And I just don't think with him at the helm, any of these things work, because I think people have just shut their ears and moved on. Third, I think, what are the facts of it? this, on any given years probably affects a few percentage of people over the course of their lifetime, maybe a fifth of the electorate. But, what you said on people think that, more people think this will affect them than will. It's, what about a third of the electorate thinks that it does affect them? So probably 10x what it is this year and 50% more than it is total over somebody's lifetime. So that's definitely true too. All of that to say, framing it as we're conservatives, we don't like tax increases, and the government's going to screw you with a tax increase isn't a difficult message for conservatives to sell, and certainly not a difficult message for Poilievre to sell. And I think he's doing that, and the conservatives will be willing to spend money on this, and the liberals won't. So I think they march on. They've merged this into sort of the overall overarching narrative around taxation generally in a way that I think will work for them. So I think opportunity lost if you're the liberals. Trapped, disarmed, and judoed on the liberals if you're Poilievre.
Jordan, why do you think that working class people in Canada are so immune to class politics?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a generally true statement. I think right now the version of class politics that's being played out is particularly ineffective for some of the reasons that Kory talked about that have to do with Trudeau as a messenger and Freeland as a messenger. I don't think most people find either of them terribly compelling on the idea that they are truly going to soak the rich, particularly when, as Scott talked about, this measure is actually, it's too small really to be true class warfare. And I think I was actually really interested. So in your Herle Burley show with Ken Bosanquist and
Tyler Meredith and Jennifer Robson.
Yeah, which is great, like for anyone who wants to deeply nerd out on this. But I'd particularly commend their discussion about, could you have framed this, or could you have used this as a way into, for example, a wealth tax? And you could talk about this as the thin edge of a wedge on a wealth tax. And we're going at it. We're going after assets. And they did none of this. And so those are interesting choices, right? Because the liberals here really did shy away from framing it in those big terms. So they actually, they teed up and swung and just went a completely different direction. So I don't think it's fair to characterize this as class warfare, because that's not how the government set this up. And so on the one hand, it's too small to be class warfare. But on the other hand, it's a bit what Kory talks about. Trudeau and Freeland in particular lack credibility speaking about the economy, speaking about managing government finances right now, and speaking about taxation. They're not viewed as credible messengers on this. And so I think that it's difficult to ignite that kind of interest within voters who are only peripherally paying attention when your messengers are already discredited on that topic. And this is where I think Poilievre was smart in terms of he zoomed back out. He made this into a broader issue. He took it to ground that's more favorable for him, which is the idea that liberals are raising taxes. This does meet the nod test for people who are just peripherally paying attention. And he was able to fold it into that. He's going to design a perfect unicorn tax system after he's elected, guys. Don't ask for too many details beforehand, but it's going to be great. You should really just trust him on that. So I think that, he, which is, by the way, amazing that he's going to get away from that. He's totally kept his options open. He's kept all his powder dry.
Why do the Conservatives hate Atlantic Canada so much?
Right. Well,
did you not notice that while there are farmers on that task force panel, there are no fishers?
No. And no lobbyists, by the way. So, yeah. But look, I mean, it's smart on his part, right? Because he doesn't have to spend any of his good ammo. He doesn't have to go out and talk about a personal income tax cut yet. He doesn't have to reveal even if he's going to reverse this change. We don't know, because it's all going to be designed in this perfect system. And he's capitalizing on the trust people have in him as a messenger on the issue of taxation. Where does this leave everybody? Look, I think it's a wash. I think they're going to fight to a draw on it. But I would say overall, point goes to Poilievre, because they took something that the Liberals thought going in was going to be this clever wedge advantage, and they did judo it. And some of that is on the Liberals for their inability to deliver clean messaging on their own wedge.
So if they'd spent $10 million between the budget and today pounding Poilievre on this, it'd be a different issue.
I agree.
It would be a different issue because, like, writ large, like the electorate tends to think that conservatives are like the monopoly man with a top hat and a monocle and a cane and, skipping down Bay Street. There is a deeply, deeply held public perception that that's who conservatives do business for. But I'd say under this current environment, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a unique situation right now.
Poilievre has so focused on trying to not let that narrative get established, to focus on workers, to have a more blue collar complexion to his framing of issues. That's helpful. And it's also helpful that a Nepo trust fund baby is the prime minister, and that he is someone from a lower middle class background who appears to be much closer to middle class values and voters when it comes to their economic interests. And so I think it's very difficult to divorce the messenger from the message in politics generally. And you've got somebody who looks like they're your guy in Poilievre. If you're a middle class voter, he's your guy in this fight. And the person who looks like he's the defender of the moneyed upper class is Trudeau, because that's where he's from. And so, like, it's a man bites dog sort of narrative that the Liberals are trying to push here that isn't working for them.
So that's all true, Kory. I agree with all that. But it's also, to go back to our old hobby horse on this show, I mean, I think the Liberals have worked at this pretty hard since the budget. They haven't lost track of it. They kept driving it. They set up this vote separately, and they've been out there messaging and working it. But you cannot frame a debate. You cannot frame a debate and win a debate through earned media these days.
If this were a military campaign, it's like we're going to win without air power.
Yeah,
we're against air power, and so therefore we're going to be the only army on the field. We're only going to use tanks and soldiers on the ground. We don't believe in airplanes anymore. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. You're going to lose. Doesn't matter how good your battle plan is. You've decided to go to war without air power.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. Scott, you got a last word, or should we go to Gordon?
Very quick. My last word has got nothing to do with this. I'm going to do a bit of a divergence, but picking up on the mention of the panel that you had on the Herle Burley, Ken Bosenkool said something. He said, if you look at the Poilievre video, all the members of the Curse of Politics will tell you that's terrible communication, because if you're explaining, you're losing. Ken's wrong. I don't think that's bad communication. I think it's fascinating communication, and because he's not explaining, he's not on defense. He's trying to use it as a means to connect.
Storytelling.
And he's learning the most
narrative building.
That's right. The most underappreciated piece of political communication in our modern constellation is YouTube. Like, it just hasn't really been. YouTube is really shifting, has been shifting for a while, a whole variety of fields, and it hasn't been employed and harnessed in quite the way it could be and should be by the political level yet. And I think that this is his attempt to break into it. And it has to be a 15-minute video if you're going to do it, or 7 or 8-minute video if you're going to do it for YouTube. And I just think he's taking some of the YouTuber lessons. Now, I will say this. Liberals, pay attention, not just to mimic and where you can, although most of you don't have the game to mimic, and these videos that are prepared are so cartoonishly bad, they make me want to pound my head against a brick wall. But watch what he does. I've made this point before. He isn't just trying to communicate his position and persuade people or cheer up and rev up the tribe. What he's doing, if you watch, right, is he wants to be the leader of his own church. There is a YouTube / Jordan Peterson-esque, I'm going to provide you with an intellectual foundation for my choices, not just a political argument. And there is a hubris there. There is a hubris that you can puncture and poke at. Those things are a clue. That's how Pierre Poilievre sees himself, how he wishes to see himself. That's his ego on display. ego is a vulnerability. Take it, liberals. Get underneath that. Poke at it, right? Donald Trump loses his mind when people say you're not really a billionaire. You're not as rich as you want, right? Pierre Poilievre, right? He's going to be sensitive to the charge of, you're not so fucking smart, eh? Like, this is really kind of like, this is bad stuff. This is dumb stuff, what you're doing. He's not going to respond to that well. There's a hubris to the way that he's communicating, not the means and the mechanisms, but what it aspires to, what it tells you about how he wishes to be seen and how he wishes to present himself.
And think about if women
give man wings and he will fly.
Yeah. Would women want to be stuck with this guy at a cocktail party?
Speaking of YouTube, apparently thousands of people watch us on YouTube, and judging by the comments, they loathe us.
Well, they don't loathe Kory.
I think Kory's found his people there.
They loathe me. That's for fucking sure.
All right.
Gordon Pinson.
Gordon Pinson, please bring this to a conclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Who wants to start with the Hey You?
I got one.
I've got one. Okay. You go, Jordan.
So mine is maybe a little earnest this week, but it's going out. It's going out to anybody in the coming week who might want to be talking about climate change. But really, I'm talking overwhelmingly to liberals and maybe to some New Democrats. But look, we're Central Eastern Canada. We're going to be under a heat dome for the next few days. And I learned recently, by the way, that heat domes are actually now the most lethal climate-related and weather-related event that happens in Canada, which, I think should probably give everybody pause. I don't know about you, but like my little kids are going to an unair-conditioned school where for the next week, they will not actually be able to stay in the classrooms because it's too hot. So they won't be learning. They'll be out sitting in the shade somewhere, hopefully.
That's how I remember June.
Yeah. Well,
from school.
I don't know. I don't remember it being so hot that you couldn't actually be in the classroom. But anyway,
I remember some baseball days though.
Baseball days. That would be
sit under the maple.
That would require baseballs in a field and staff. That doesn't happen anymore. Look, go
outside and vape, kids.
Yeah, just sit quietly in the shade. We'll put a movie on. Look, I think there's going to rightly be a lot of temptation to talk about climate change when we see these big events. I think that progressive parties and people who care about climate change should talk about it. I think you should deliver the fight to the Conservatives about where their climate plan is. But my prayer to you, please, for the love of God, do not do this by talking about the carbon tax. Don't do it. Just stop. What I would like instead, what I would suggest is that, there's some excellent research that's happened about good communication around climate change, what actually engages people, what makes them not tune out and drop out. And a lot of it, ironically, is about telling a story of the potential for change, that we're not just doomed to an apocalyptic future, that there is some hope to shift this. You have to do better on communicating around climate change if you want to build any public support for action. So try this as a thought experiment over the next week. Try to talk about climate change without just talking about the carbon tax. And by all means, make it political. Please make it political. But don't make it political on a loser issue that you failed to communicate around. Don't sacrifice the entire issue of climate change on this one thing that is already doomed. That is my hey you.
Very good one. And by the way, that fucking issue is sinking like me in the water. All right, Kory, you got a hey you?
Yeah, I'm going to throw my hey you to Marco Mendicino, who was probably one of the bright spots. A terrible week in Ottawa last week, but one of the highlights was being out at dinner and looking across, sitting next to me is Marco Mendicino. And if there's anybody based on comments and past hey yous who probably should have walked over and threw a glass of wine in my face or maybe punched me in the nose, would be Marco Mendicino. But instead, we had a nice chat. The guy looks healthy. He's got a positive attitude. And I want to do a hey you because, in politics, we all have ups and downs. We've all spent time as the glorious people who are so smart and can do no wrong. And we've also spent time as the losers and the untouchables that can do nothing right, and are probably the stupidest people to ever be born on planet Earth. And neither is ever true. But how you deal with the setbacks that you inevitably face in politics is a great test of character. And I just want to say, hey, you, Marco Mendicino, you're passing that test with flying colors. It's great to see somebody who's has such a positive disposition and a positive attitude, and including to know-it-all assholes like me who haven't said the nicest things in the past. So anyway, hey, Marco, good job.
Yeah.
Here.
I had such a bad case of leprosy after 2006. It took years to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Marco's a pal of mine. I kind of hate the fact that he was dumped from cabinet, but not for the obvious reasons. He's gotten so fit. He does like 2-a-days. He's lost like 30 pounds. He's all like gristle and muscle now. And the last time we met for a beer,
Gristle.
he sipped a fucking water the whole time. I'm like, go away. I don't even want to meet with you anymore. It's no fun. Fuck. Okay, my hey you is just, I don't know, liberal. It's addressed to the Liberal Party of Canada. It, like, in general, those who might be in charge of the next election.
A howl into the void.
Just hello. I dropped a penny. Waiting to hear it. Dimmer. Hello. Nothing.
I'm not sure it's
no splash. But anyway, 2 events last week. One is the interest rate. Right, we finally got an interest rate. A week and a half ago. And second, I got this thing in Calgary, man. Right? But they can't, water main's going to take 3 days to repair, 5 days. Now it's going to be 6 weeks. Nobody in Calgary, we're asking you not to use water. Stampede is coming. We can't have water. Can't have water. Like the Gardner in Toronto, like it is just, it's under repair. You can't move. You walk by it. The things fall from it. Might be people, might be scales. It's hard to tell. Like, my point is this. In the aftermath of that interest rate cut, there's this impulse to say, yeah, we've turned a corner, right? Or there might be an impulse to look at something like, the Gardner and the water main in Calgary and say, see, we need to invest in infrastructure. These are the things that differentiate ourselves. But these things are all working against you. The interest rate change is a reminder about the inflation discussion and how people feel put upon. The fact that can't drink water in Calgary is a condemnation. It's a validation that everything is broken, as Poilievre says. Like, these things, the feel of these things, not the think, but the feel of these things are bad for the incumbent Liberal government. And so we've said it before, but I look at these things and I watch people and I hear people in my city of Toronto talking about the Gardner, talking about how fucked up it is to try to get beneath Bloor and move around and operate. And I think all of this is bad for the Liberals. And so I beseech you, make this election and make your message and make the debate about going forward. This constant incumbent impulse to pick on everything that appears in the headline and show that it's a validation that you've done right or that you have been right. It's loser. Even the things you think when a sewer main blows, see, that's why we're investing in infrastructure. It isn't a good thing to highlight. It isn't working for you. You've got to make this election the first election, not the most recent election. It's got to be about the future. And the signs are all around. And, it's not think, it's feel, man. And you got to get the feel.
Well, mine is, I guess, a corollary to that. My hey you goes out to Justin Trudeau. Spent some time looking at the abacus numbers last night. If you're going to stay, your government needs an entire reboot. Not just shuffling personnel, but giving your government a clear and evident new focus on affordability and economics. The latest Abacus survey says the only issue people look to the Liberals to solve is climate change, and that's no longer a top 5 issue with voters. On affordability, the number 1 issue, the Liberals are third. Some sacred cows are going to need to get killed. Some previously unthinkable things need to be done. If you don't want Poilievre to be the Prime Minister, you have to change or you have to leave. So, hey you. So, Thank you all for being here with me today. Another fun day. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN. All the cursed out there who watched or listened to the show today, thank you very much. So we'll be back perhaps a day late next week, perhaps a day late, so that we can have absorbed the St. Paul's by-election results before we groove into this show on next week. So we'll give you an alert on that on the socials, but in any event, we'll see you next week sometime. Take care of yourselves.